cheated on my wife with someone I met at the gym. It all came crashing down soon after. I never imagined I'd be the type to find myself entangled in an affair. But then again, life has a funny way of twisting the plot when you least expect it. I'm a 35-year-old accountant, living in a city that's just big enough to get lost in, but small enough that you still bump into your ex at the grocery store. I've been married to Sarah for 7 years, and for the most part, we've had a decent run. Comfortable, predictable, maybe a bit too predictable. It all started at the gym, of all places. After years of neglecting my New Year's resolutions, I finally decided to commit to getting back in shape. The treadmills were lined up like a row of hamster wheels, and I dutifully climbed onto one, ready to jog away the remnants of last night's pizza. That's when I noticed her, a woman on the treadmill next to mine, earbuds in, utterly oblivious to the world. She had this infectious energy, the kind that makes you want to run an extra mile just to keep up. I didn't think much of it at first. People come and go in these places, and the gym isn't exactly a social hotspot. But over the next few weeks, our schedules seemed to sync up. We'd arrive around the same time, nod politely, maybe share a fleeting smile. One day, the treadmill on the other side of her was out of order, and the gym was unusually crowded. She glanced at me and made a joking gesture about the broken machine. I chuckled, pointing at the maintenance sign that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. Our interactions escalated from silent acknowledgments to brief conversations. Her name was Lisa, a graphic designer who recently moved to the city. She had a sharp wit and a laugh that could disarm a Navy SEAL. We started timing our cooldowns together, stretching on the mats while discussing everything from the absurdity of reality TV to the best coffee shops in town. I told myself it was harmless. After all, what's wrong with making a new friend? But deep down, I knew there was a spark, a dangerous, exhilarating spark that I'd been missing. Sarah and I had settled into a routine that felt more like cohabitation than a marriage. Our conversations revolved around grocery lists and utility bills. Intimacy had become a scheduled chore, penciled in between work deadlines and her book club meetings. One evening, as I was leaving the gym, Lisa suggested grabbing a smoothie from the juice bar across the street. I hesitated, thinking about the leftover lasagna waiting at home and the unread emails piling up. But the allure of her company was too strong. We sat in a corner booth, the fluorescent lights casting a surreal glow over our table. The conversation flowed effortlessly, each topic branching into another like an endless river. As I drove home that night, a knot formed in my stomach. Guilt, excitement, fear, all tangled up like headphones in a pocket. I rationalized that it was just a smoothie, just a conversation. But a part of me recognized that I'd crossed an invisible line, one that was easier to blur than to redraw. Over the next few weeks, Lisa and I grew closer. We started meeting outside the gym coffee here, a quick lunch there. I found myself checking my phone incessantly, hoping for a text from her. She had this way of making me feel seen, appreciated. It was intoxicating. The first time we kissed, it felt surreal. We were walking through a park after an impromptu dinner. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the landscape. She stopped to admire a group of ducks waddling by the pond, and when she turned back, our faces were inches apart. Without thinking, I leaned in. The world seemed to pause, the background fading into oblivion. In the aftermath, reality came crashing back. Panic set in. What was I doing? I was a married man. I stumbled through an apology, but Lisa placed a finger on my lips, her eyes searching mine. She confessed that she'd felt a connection since the day we met but didn't want to complicate things. Complicate things, that was putting it mildly. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to come clean to Sarah, to lay everything out and face the consequences. But another part clung to the euphoria I'd felt with Lisa. I was torn between duty and desire, caught in a moral limbo. The affair escalated. We began seeing each other regularly, sneaking around like teenagers. Every encounter was a mix of exhilaration and dread. I became adept at crafting excuses, late meetings, traffic jams, unexpected errands. Sarah seemed oblivious, or perhaps she chose to ignore the signs. Either way, the guilt was eating me alive. One afternoon, Lisa and I decided to skip work and drive to a nearby beach. It was a spontaneous decision, the kind that felt liberating. We walked along the shore, the waves lapping at our feet. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget the web of lies I'd spun. But as the sun began to set, a storm rolled in, mirroring the turmoil brewing inside me. On the drive back, Lisa brought up the topic I'd been avoiding. She wanted to know where this was going. Could there be a future for us? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized that I couldn't keep living this double life. I was being unfair to both Sarah and Lisa, and to myself. That night I decided to tell Sarah the truth. My hands were shaking as I walked through the front door. She was sitting on the couch, engrossed in a book. I sat down opposite her, my heart pounding louder than a marching band. Before I could speak, she looked up and said we needed to talk. Turns out she had known for weeks. She'd found a receipt for a restaurant we never went to, noticed the late nights, the distant gazes. She'd even seen a text pop up on my phone when I left it unattended. Sarah, ever the pragmatic one, had already consulted a lawyer and was prepared to file for divorce. Her calm demeanor was unnerving. There were no tears, no raised voices, just a cold, calculated presentation of facts and next steps. It was as if I were a client being briefed on a tax audit. I felt a strange mix of relief and devastation. Part of me had hoped for an emotional confrontation, a chance to plead my case, maybe even salvage what was left. But she was resolute. In the following weeks, I moved into a small apartment downtown. Lisa was supportive, but our relationship began to strain under the weight of reality. Without the cloak of secrecy, the thrill diminished, revealing the cracks beneath. She started questioning if we were together because we genuinely wanted to be, or if we were just escaping our respective voids. One evening, over takeout and cheap wine, Lisa confessed that she felt responsible for the fallout of my marriage. She suggested taking a break, giving me time to sort out my life. I wanted to argue, to convince her that we could make it work. But deep down, I knew she was right. Alone in my apartment, the silence was deafening. The walls seemed to close in, each one bearing the weight of my choices. I began to reflect on how I'd ended up here, a middle-aged man who'd torpedoed his own life in search of... what exactly? Excitement? Validation? Freedom? I started attending therapy, hoping to untangle the mess in my head. The therapist was a no-nonsense woman who didn't let me off the hook. She pushed me to confront my fears, my insecurities, the patterns that led me down this path. It was uncomfortable, like ripping off a bandage to find the wound still festering underneath. Sarah and I met a few times to finalize the divorce proceedings. During one meeting, she admitted that she wasn't entirely blameless. Our marriage had become stagnant, and neither of us had made an effort to rekindle the spark. It was a bittersweet acknowledgement, a shared acceptance of our mutual failures. As for Lisa, we drifted apart. Our affair had been built on shaky foundations, and without the adrenaline rush of secrecy, there wasn't much left to hold us together. She eventually moved to another city, chasing a job opportunity, and, perhaps, a fresh start. Months turned into a year. I threw myself into work, picked up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends. Slowly, I began to rebuild, laying each brick with more intention than the last. I learned to find contentment in solitude, to face my flaws without flinching. Looking back, I realized that the affair was a symptom, not the disease. It was a misguided attempt to fill a void I hadn't even acknowledged existed. I craved connection, excitement, a break from the monotony, but I went about it in the worst possible way. Do I regret it? That's a complicated question. Regret implies a desire to erase the past, but every misstep taught me something valuable. I hurt people I cared about, and there's no undoing that. But I've also grown in ways I might not have otherwise. Life isn't a neatly wrapped package. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright cruel, but it's also filled with opportunities to learn, to change, to become a better version of oneself. I won't pretend that I'm now a paragon of virtue, but I'm trying. Every so often I'll drive by the old gym and feel a pang of nostalgia mixed with a twinge of remorse. I've since canceled my membership not because I blame the gym, but because it represents a chapter I've closed. Sarah and I are on amicable terms. We exchange the occasional email, mostly about logistics or updates on mutual friends. I heard she started dating again, and I genuinely hope she finds happiness. She deserves that much. As for me, I'm taking things one day at a time. I've embraced the uncertainty of life, accepting that not everything needs to be planned or predicted, and while I can't change the past, I can choose how to move forward. So there it is, a tale of infidelity, wrapped in humorless self-awareness and sprinkled with the irony of a life unexamined. If there's a moral to this story, perhaps it's that running from your problems only leads you in circles. Or maybe it's just that middle-aged accountants should stick to crunching numbers and avoid spontaneous beach trips with enigmatic women. Either way, I've learned that the most challenging journeys are the ones that force you to confront yourself. And sometimes, the hardest person to forgive is the one staring back at you in the mirror.